crucial conversation in mind that you've been putting off? Maybe it's with your boss, a colleague, your direct report, or your spouse. This week, I coached through a crucial conversation with a client, and I shared the high performance framework for impactful conversations with her. She loved it. She loved the clarity of it, and she said that it really helped her to get to the outcome that she wanted when she met with her boss. Curious about this? Well, I'm lifting the lid on this framework in this episode. Let's get started, shall we? Well, hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Project Joyful podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Tutty, your medical herbalist and high performance coach. So, hey, Project Joyful isn't just about being happy. It's about consciously creating a life you love. It's about remembering how to reconnect with your soul-centered joy. You know, that joy that comes from doing what you love, from living on purpose, and from being in a life that allows you to experience deep joy moment by moment. So hey, let's get started, shall we? So I was coaching a client this week as she was scheduled to have a really important conversation with her boss. Like all great team leaders, she had a dozen things on the go that she needed to brief her boss on, but there was one really important outcome that she needed to discuss with her boss in order to get it over the line. Now, the two biggest mistakes I see in these situations is not planning out the conversation from the perspective of the person that you're going to have the conversation with and bringing too many things into the one conversation. Today, I'm going to share the high performance framework that will help you have an impactful conversation with your boss for all the right reasons. Now, great conversations really happen by accident, especially when you're at work. The quality of your conversations are a key component in the matrix that determines how satisfying we find our work and how cohesive we are as a team. Within my Revitalize coaching program, I have a framework for creating great conversations at work, and you can use it at home too. I'll share the framework today and go a little deeper on the one that will have the most impact for you right now. So the first part of this framework involves trust. Great conversations happen in a space that feels safe and where there's trust. Trusting not just between whoever's in the conversation, but also trusting in your corporate culture. If this conversation you're about to have hasn't been initiated by the receiver, then that person will be mindful of how they've heard similar conversations played out with others. They may be looking for hidden agendas from their frame of reference. They may be defensive or less open to the conversation. Now, if you've invested time in getting to know them, sharing common interests, being aware of how things are in their personal life, establishing rapport not just because it's useful, but because you're genuinely curious, then a foundation of trust will be present. And this conversation is going to add or detract from that foundation of trust, because trust is like money in the bank. It takes a while to build it up, and if you're not aware of where you're dropping that cash, it can be gone in an instant. From your boss's perspective, trust is also the downstream consequence of your responsiveness. When you say you'll do something, do you always do it? Do you let them know when you can't do something, the reason why it hasn't been done or hasn't been done on time, and when whatever that task that you've been trusted with will get done? Now, you're allowed to be human. So letting them know that you can't be present entirely right now, but normal service will resume when deadline X is passed next Tuesday, well, it shows vulnerability and it builds loyalty and understanding. Leadership relies on your responsiveness. So if you're a bit hit and miss on this one, focus on that first. It's one of those keystone leadership qualities. Dial it in and other areas of leadership will naturally elevate. The next two elements are more closely aligned with the conversation itself. What's the outcome that you'd like this conversation to deliver? Is it a one and done, or is it the first in a series of conversations? If this is likely to be one of many conversations, spend some time defining the ultimate outcome and then break that outcome down into journey goals. For each of those journey goals and for the outcome, work out how you'll know when you've reached that goal or outcome. And if you've got a bunch of stuff you need to talk about, decide on what's the highest priority and cover just that in the meeting. Now think about the outcome that you're after and work backwards from it, breaking that outcome down into smaller deliverable portions. What needs to be said to bring your boss along with you until you arrive at your desired outcome? What do you need to hear? If you're looking to see change, what needs to happen before that change becomes embedded? And what evidence do you need that that change has actually taken place? Now think about what they might be looking for as a result of this conversation. What are their needs? What do they need to achieve? How can you help them to achieve their goals? Does this outcome bring one of their goals forward? If it does, how can you articulate that so it's really clear that this intended outcome is a win-win? And if it's not aligned with a goal that you're aware of, how can you shape this outcome so everybody in the conversation feels like they're getting from the deal? The other aspect of the outcome, and the one that's often overlooked, is how do you want the other person to feel following your conversation? Inspired, focused, determined, hopeful, enthusiastic? What can you do or say that's going to encourage this emotional state? The final element recognizes the fact that you'll be having a conversation with a person in real time. And this element is all about delivery. Think about this person. Do they prefer to communicate visually? Are they more auditory or kinesthetic? Does it match your natural communication style, or is it different? If it's different, how can you bring more of their natural style into the conversation? Maybe speaking a bit faster or a bit slower, more or less pauses, for example. And think about what you want to communicate and brainstorm different ways of communicating that. Can you bring in stories or metaphors? How can you communicate in a more inclusive way? Often it's about communicating the same thing but in different ways. Consider your rapport building skills. Now don't forget to match and to change your pace so that the conversation has a dynamic to it. It's a dance with both parties contributing to create something bigger than just two people. By focusing on these 4 elements, you'll set yourself up for having great conversations. And this framework will make those difficult conversations easier. Lay the groundwork. Really serve your executive team by getting to know them. The better you know them, the better you can support them. Become known as somebody who listens and somebody who responds. Make time to get really clear on why this conversation matters and to whom. How will you know you're on track in the conversation? How do you want them to feel at the end of the conversation? And what can you do to keep the energy dynamic? It's not a soliloquy. It's a conversation. Check in with your rapport building skills. Now your goal is not to lead the entire conversation. Set the pace. But also make sure you match and mirror the other person so that they feel understood as well as knowing that they've been heard. The biggest mistakes I see when it comes to having these impactful conversations is that fear of the unknown wins and these conversations get put off. To be effective, these crucial conversations need for there to be clarity on the desired outcome. Do this before beginning the conversation. Plan a number of ways you can ensure that the conversation delivers on your desired outcome, or ensure that you have the energy that's needed to carry out this conversation. Great conversations do happen in the moment. They're less frequent, and they're usually led by someone who knows how to have impactful conversations. So practice that. Most impactful conversations are planned, particularly if they're difficult ones. Start planning for those conversations so that you can make a difference by having conversations that matter in the moment. As an executive coach and medical herbalist, I integrate protocols such as these that we've talked about in this episode into my coaching sessions. This ensures my clients not only lead effectively, but they also maintain their well-being. This holistic approach helps managers, executives, and professionals stay at their peak performance even during those challenging times. Curious about elevating your leadership? I'm Tracy Tutty, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Or if Instagram is more your thing, connect with me at Tracy C. Tutty. Let's have a chat about your health-centered leadership. Curious about this framework? I'm lifting the lid on it in those conversations. Sending you lots of love. Bye for now. Hey, thanks for listening to today's podcast. Can I ask you a favour? If our conversation spoke to you today, could you please take a moment to leave a 5-star review? Your review will help people discover this podcast, and together we can create a world where there's even more love and more laughter. And if you want to hear more from the Project Joyful podcast, just click the subscribe button. Bye for now.